So hello everyone, welcome to Sunya IAS. Now this is something very essential. We know it very well that prelims examinations are coming very close, and under these circumstances the most important thing is your preparation has to be done in such a manner that you will be well prepared for your upcoming prelims 2023 examination. So for that very purpose, Sunya IAS has brought for you high yielding topics. Okay, this high yielding topics, okay, specifically I'll be taking it for modern history, are going to be 4 different categorization for modern history specifically. They are in history plays a very vital role, you know it very well. So vis-a-vis speaking like that, I can assure you that these topics will be very helpful for your prelims purposes. So what we are going to discuss in these classes, upcoming modern history related classes. So there will be 4 different set of classes. We'll start with terminologies, and then terminologies which are important with respect to modern history, and then we'll move in other topics like commissions which were made during the British Indian times, right from the Amini Commission, which was the very first commission which was formed. I'm not sure how many of you know that if a question will be asked directly that tell us the first commission ever established by Britishers in India, and this could be asked because you know commission is the very making commission is a very normal thing which our bureaucracy does. So you should always remember the first commission. So that's a mini commission, but similar to that we'll be reading about a lot of commissions also that will be coming on later in this series only. The first thing where we are going to start is the terminologies. Okay, for terminologies also we will be going through 6 small lectures. Okay, we'll try to wrap it up as smaller sections as close by as we can, and let's start with the very first lecture on we'll start. So and before moving forward, I would like to tell you something more, that if you are preparing well enough, make sure that you go to the Sunya IAS website. The links and all details are down there. If possible, make sure just check out the course which is listed there. It will be very helpful for you in preparation, not only modern history but all the subjects for prelims 2023. So let's move forward and let's start with the quotient itself, because ultimately that's what we have to tackle. You have to tackle that thing, so it will be better if I'll start with that only. So the very first thing which you need to know here is, suppose the quotient is like this. Consider the following statement. Dominion status meant nativization of domestic administration. Then the second statement says, Gandhi's concept of Swaraj talked about both political and control of power, political and social control of power. Then the third statement says home rule was a borrowed concept. Fourth statement says Purna Swaraj explains the modern concept of independence. And the fifth statement says transfer of power talked about handling over the control of government to the natives. Now, in a way, when you are tackling this question, there are 5 different terms which you need to know just to answer this one question, right from dominion status to Gandhi's idea of Swaraj to the concept of home rule, Purna Swaraj, and final one, transfer of power. These 5 terms are very important and actually of utmost important when it comes to the nationalist phase of Indian freedom struggle. And as you know that the nationalist struggle is the part from where the most of the modern history questions are going to come from. You need to know, I have some idea, but I can also tell you that it sounds very easy, but ultimately what happens if I'll ask you what is home rule, you will say sir dominion status. If I'll ask you what is dominion status, then you will say sir home rule. So half of the people are always confused between sir home rule hi dominion status hota hai and dominion state is only the concept of dominion status, home rule, all of them are same only. So that is not the case. If there is a term, if any leader, if any mass movement started with a specific purpose, there has to be predefined characteristic features of each of them. Unless and until you know it very well, you won't be able to answer these things. I am very sure that you must have read these statements again and again and again and again, but I am also sure that you still would be a bit confused in it. Then there are terms like Swaraj. Swaraj is very vaguely defined. Even Gandhiji never explained it in a very well defined manner. So what it is, whether it is a ethical concept, it's a moral concept, or it's a political concept, it's a social concept, or are we going to look it into economic basis, that itself is a confusion. Purna Swaraj was defined properly by Jawaharlal Nehru, and we have kind of a basic idea because of the Lahore resolution. We'll discuss that thing. Then the terms come transfer of power. That's a ball game in its own. Okay, so we'll be looking at all these terms first of all before even we try this question. The agenda of the class is that we should know at least these 5 very important, very essential concepts which are everywhere in the news when you are reading Indian national struggle as a part of modern history, but most of us don't know the exact meaning of it. Fine, so let's begin this thing. So that's what the agenda of the class is. We'll start with dominion status, we'll move to home rule, Swaraj, Purna Swaraj, and transfer of power. These are the 5 different terms which we have to read in today's class itself. So let's begin with dominion status, but before that, as I was telling you that this series of classes are going to be 6 parts just for terminology. In the very first lecture, we'll be discussing about the national movement, related to national movement. So these 5 very essential terms are for the national movement. Then the second class will start with the very beginning of modern history, that is from the decline of Mughal Empire, the rise of Marathas and all that period. What were the key terminologies, and there have been a lot of PYQs also from this section. When I'll reach over there, I'll give you an example. Like in 2021 only, there was a very simple question that Suba, Mahal, Sultanate, okay, Sarkar, all this has to be said that in what order they are, and one has to know very well what's the meaning of that. That's covered in medieval also, but you need to know it from the modern perspective. So Mughal and Maratha will, and since Mughal and Maratha involve a lot of the administrative features, it will take 2 classes to do so. Then we will move to the British administrative terms, okay, whether it is ring fence policy, doctrine of lapse, all those things will be defined here. Then we'll move on to economic policy and its impact, the British economic policy, so the drain of wealth theory, okay, or various economic agenda, economic policies which the Britishers took, okay, we'll discuss over here. And in a way, the most important one will be tribal and peasant related. There was a question few years back, what is Ulugulan? Okay, it's a tribal word, so we'll discuss about that. Similarly, you might have heard about the word Diku. That's not Diku, that's basically Daku, how Britishers pronounced it. So in what sense tribals use the word Daku or Diku, howsoever you want to pronounce it, we'll be looking in that. Then what it actually entails, who they used to call Daku, we'll look into that. Similarly, there are other tribal words which could be asked in any upcoming examination. It's very easy, and they are mentioned in your NCERT book also, old as well as new. Okay, so we'll picking up all those things and we'll be taking in the class. So this is the agenda of the class. Now in this lecture we are going to start with the first thing, that is the terminology 1, that is about Indian national movement, and in this lecture we'll pick up these 5 of the topics. Okay, so let's begin. Let's begin with the dominion status. Now dominion status, I hope so if you are watching this lecture, if you are seeing it on YouTube, you must be having some idea that dominion status officially was considered as in a resolution of Congress, in Congress annual session of 1906, where Dada Bhai Nehruji was the presiding official, that is, he was the president of Congress in 1906, and it was all happening during the Swadeshi and boycott movement. But where exactly this word come from and what it actually means? When Congress was asking that we expect the British government will give us dominion status, what they actually meant. So it's not like they didn't had any idea. It actually came from a very basic thing. And look, you need to understand, just like right now the current event happens and then one current event leads to another event, and then that's how cycle moves. Back in the day also the similar kind of thing used to happen. So over here you need to understand that Britishers gave Canada dominion status in 1867. Similarly, they gave Australia dominion status in 1901. And the talk of the town after 1904 was that New Zealand will also get dominion status. Okay, so if I'll make a joke, unki current affairs manual mein there must be something going on that New Zealand is very soon going to get dominion status. Okay, so New Zealand was going to get dominion status. It was all over the news, and actually they got the dominion status in 1907. And based on this only, because it was in the news, it was in the popular parlance, Indian leaders also got interested that if Canada can have autonomy or dominion status in that word of the sense, and if Australia can have it, and even New Zealand is going to get it, why not India? So the demand of the dominion status was on the lines of Canada, Australia and New Zealand. And what it entails, the characteristic features. The characteristic features were again very simple, and I'll open a open sheet and I'll explain it to you. The characteristic features were internal autonomy. Okay, for foreign policy agenda, for finances and bigger investment on all those things, Indians were ready to let the Viceroy have a veto. But everything else, as far as it is related to local issues, Indians wanted to administer things on their own, or basically I should say natives wanted to do it on their own. Okay, it happened during the time of Swadeshi and boycott movement, 1905 onward, and you will see after that the things change, and when the radical faction of the Congress started putting a lot of pressure on the moderate faction to implement Swadeshi and boycott movement in whole of British India, it came as a olive branch from the side of the moderate faction. When Dadabhai Nehruji became the presiding officer, he made sure that to calm down the radical faction who wanted Bal Gangadhar Tilak as the president, he said that Congress will accept the demand, or Congress will pass a resolution that now they want Britishers to give us, the natives, dominion status. That is where it is coming from. That is what it entails, that you should know. Okay, now that is all what you were needed to know. Let's move forward. Home rule. Now what home rule means, for most of the people, if you'll ask them what home rules mean, they'll say autonomy, dominion status, something like that. Is it so? So you need to understand where this whole concept of home rule is actually coming from. So there was this is not that important for your examination, but you should know this thing, that there was a organization called as Irish Republican Army, and prior to it there was a Irish Home Rule League. There was a Irish Home Rule League. Now it's Irish, so where it will be? It will be in Ireland. And the leader or the person who came with the idea of home rule in Ireland first, was name was C.S. Parnell. Okay, Charles Stewart Parnell. Okay. Now Parnell gave a speech in 1885 where he was talking about that the natives should allow to rule Ireland. That's it. That was the bigger idea, which was about home rule. Home rule was also coming with the idea of autonomy, but there is a bit of a difference. They were saying that we'll stay the part of Great Britain. Okay, we will stay a part of Great Britain, but for everything else except for making the decision on war and peace, they will handle things on their own. When the issue of making war or peace with any other territory, the British government in London will decide, but everything else will be decided by the Home Rule leaders, or basically the leadership of Ireland. That was the demand of Home Rule League, the Irish Home Rule League, and this became popular in Ireland in 1885. Now, then how it came to India? The most prominent person who is connected with Home Rule in India, her name is Annie Besant. And I hope everyone is familiar with the point that Annie Besant was actually an English woman, or Scottish I should say, and she came from Britain to India in 1893 as a part of the Theosophical movement, or Theosophical society I should say. She settled down in Adyar, started working for a religious faction, that was Theosophical movement, but very soon it was realized that she was also got very active on the political and the social front. Opening educational institutions she was involved in. She also got involved in political activities, but you need to understand that Ms. Besant, before coming to India, was also actively involved in English politics. She was a supporter of Home Rule League, and that's where she understood this idea that nativization of the government is very essential. And then when she came to India, you will see when she got an opportunity somewhere around 1915, she became prominent enough. She went with this idea to the Congress leadership, and she approached the Congress leadership and introduced them with this idea that look, we need to have the local level volunteers which Congress doesn't have, because Congress is nothing more than an annual congregation. That is what she said. So Congress leaders said, okay fine, give us a year time and we will make this arrangement of having local leadership or local volunteers, and we'll also open the local level organizations all over India. But nothing really happened within a year. You will see in between this only, Bal Gangadhar Tilak went on to open his own Home Rule League. Now you will say that how Bal Gangadhar Tilak got the idea of Home Rule? You need to understand that these things were getting published in newspaper. It was not like the Indian leadership was totally unknown to what was happening in the British and the American politics. Everything was, it is not that back, it was just 100 years back. Okay, there was no social media, but there was surely a lot of newspapers, so they used to get all the information. So Bal Gangadhar Tilak was also quite impressed with the idea of Home Rule, and then he opened his Home Rule League. Tilak's Home Rule League had 6 branches, and he was mostly active in the Bombay Presidency and Central Province. So basically the what we now call as Sindh in Pakistan, Gujarat in India, Maharashtra in India, and some areas of what we now call as Madhya Pradesh. Back then it was part of Central Province. And Tilak's organization was far more active on the ground. Ms. Besant then after few months realized that actually Congress is not doing anything. And then she took things in her own hand and she started her own Home Rule League. She used the resources of Theosophical Society and she started working from her Adyar office only. So Adyar became the head office of Besant's Home Rule League, and then she got to open more than 200 chapters all around India. More than 200 chapters, not 1, not 2, not 3, 200 chapters. Now you will also get confused that okay, if Tilak was opening only 6 chapters or 6 organization franchisee, why she was able to open more than 200? Because the activity, the amount of activity or the amount of action which was done by Besant's Home Rule League was not as much as Tilak's organization had. The grasp on the ground on Besant's organization was lesser, but it played another vital role. Those people all over India who were interested in the cause of nationalism, who were interested to join Congress, who wanted to come close to the whole national movement, but didn't had a way, a path, all they had to was write a letter to the Adyar office of Theosophical Society they will get a banner, a flag, and they can paste it outside their house, and now they have started a chapter. Obviously, these people was not active that much, they were not that capable in their cities, but at least they had an office. They got this sense that they are related with the national movement now. And that is where home rule played a very important role. Because you will see after 1917, when Miss Besant got released from prison, she retired. But this volunteers of home rule they went on to join Gandhi's Swaraj idea. And then these people played a very vital role in Khilafat and non-cooperation movement. In 1920, when the first time Congress finally decided to make a Congress working committee, when Congress finally decided to really open the Congress Jila Karyalay, Congress district level office, these were the people who were the first to give the land, the property, the places for Congress to expand on a vital level. So that was the importance of home rule which you needed to know. Fine, and this is how it is very different with the idea of dominion status initially propounded. Fine, let's move forward. Let's see the idea of Swaraj. So Swaraj was actually, it's a old Sanskrit word which was already in use, okay, whether Maratha Empire used it as a Maratha Swaraj as a word. So that was already there in parlance, that was already there in use. But Gandhi used it as in most literal meaning, it will mean self-rule, Swaraj. Okay, just give me a moment. Self-rule. Self-rule. Fine. This is very essential because although he meant self-rule, but he was not only talking on the political front. But Gandhi's idea of self-rule included the social and economic front too. And when it comes to social and economic, it was more oriented to self-discipline. And that's why you will see that when Gandhi took the call of non-cooperation back in February 1922, he popularly said that our country is not yet ready for the Swaraj. Beyond this, a lot of people say that what actually Swaraj meant. So the easiest way, it could be explained as the self-rule by the people for the people. Something similar to Abraham Lincoln's idea. But beyond this, Gandhi also didn't define it very well. It's a very vague concept, and that is proven everywhere. Gandhi also talked about that it's not just independence from the foreign rule, but it also about implementation of the self-rule. So that is all what Swaraj you need to know. Fine. Next idea is Purna Swaraj. The leadership of Congress also knew that Swaraj is a bit vague in definition, and therefore in December 1929 Lahore session of Congress, when Congress understood that Britishers are not going to accept the demand put forward by the Nehru Committee, then the then President of Congress, Jawaharlal Nehru, in his presidential address gave the concept of Purna Swaraj. And here with Purna Swaraj he meant total independence. Total independence, the word was introduced because till this time there was an expectation that in the best of the scenarios also what Indians are going to get is some kind of dominion status only, some kind of a system where the Britishers will be the over supreme lord, and for the smaller things we will get the capability to do it on our own. But at this point, the Indian leadership, the Congress leadership made it very clear that what we want is a total independence, is that zero, nil involvement of the Britishers in running of Indian state. Fine. So that's where Purna Swaraj comes from. It was first officially mentioned in the Jawaharlal Nehru's presidential address or to the Lahore Congress session in 1929. Okay. So that's where Purna Swaraj comes from. Now the final and the kind of important word which many people skip, and that is transfer of power. Now you can transfer of power, as the word signifies itself, it's basically talking about how the power has to be handed over to the Indian leadership. And this word was officially mentioned by Clement Attlee in his famous speech to the British Parliament in on February 20th, 1947. This is the very famous speech where he also mentioned that by June 1948 the Britishers are going to leave India, and to execute all the steps for this departure he is going to send a new viceroy, who then came to be Louis Mountbatten, okay, of Burma. His name was Louis Mountbatten of Burma, he was not a Burmese. So now, although transfer of power was something which was already in use among the liberal lobby, among the labor leadership in Britain from late 1930s itself. It is very famous that Clement Attlee and Stafford Cripps, leaders, Labour Party leaders, when in 1939 they met V.K. Krishna Menon and Jawaharlal Nehru, they have told him this idea that whenever the Labour Party will come to power, they will transfer the power. And what actually transfer of power entails? It meant that Indians will rule India, and Britishers will have no say in it. As simple as that. Why it is important? Because till now, then, whether it was dominion status, it was home rule, it was Swaraj or it was Purna Swaraj, these ideas were propounded by the Indian leadership. Transfer of power is something which was given, the idea was given by the British leadership. So that's why also you need to know it. Let's move forward and let's tackle the question which we saw first. Consider the following statement: dominion status meant nativization of domestic administration. Isn't it correct? It's correct, because we have discussed this thing, that what we are going to get through dominion status, the power to run the local native administration. So this statement is right. Gandhi's concept of Swaraj talked about both political and social control of power. That is also right. If Gandhi is going to talk about political and social changes, he was talking through Swaraj only, and this statement is also right. Idea of home rule was a borrowed concept. Surely it was coming from Ireland. So it was a borrowed concept, there is nothing to hide there. Purna Swaraj explains the modern concept of independence. Surely it does, because it was the thing in news in 1920s. Okay, Purna Swaraj was the modern concept because it was asking for total independence. It was not the rudimentary idea of dominion status, but the moderate Indian leaders were also ready to accept from 1906 itself. So surely it was the modern concept. And the transfer of power talked about handing over the control of government to the natives. This is also correct. So basically in this question, all of the above topics are correct, and basically this was a practice question which I have prepared just to make sure to give you an idea that how these questions will be asked, and that's why the question has been framed like this. Otherwise, one or two questions could be wrong also. So I hope this would have helped you to understand this very basic concept which are everywhere in news when we are reading about national struggle, but then you also need to have some basic ideas of what each of the word entails. Okay. So that will be all for this session. Let's catch up in next lecture some of the more topics which are essential and which are related from the very beginning, that is from the Mughal administration time. Okay, so we'll talk about Mughal administration and then Maratha administration, and then we'll follow up to the lecture number 6 of this terminology class. Thank you for now and have a nice day.